Is the way that we use social media making it harder to grow up as a child in this generation? Are online advertisements following you wherever you go? Is social media inadvertently dividing us further and further apart? According to this movie, yes. Welcome to the Level Up Mental Health channel, where we talk about how technology impacts your relationships and your personal mental health. Welcome. In today's video, I want to talk to you about my thoughts as a psychiatrist on the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma. I thought this movie would be great to talk about, as it's in line with a lot of the topics that we talk about right here on this channel. And also stay tuned for the end of the video, where I'll be sharing some practical tips that we can take from this movie to apply to our own lives. So in short, The Social Dilemma is a documentary interviewing several tech developers about their thoughts about how things are going with social media and the internet, and how we as a people in society are using it or are being used by it. To break up the interview portions of the movie, they also utilize this dramatization of this family having different difficulties with social media obsession. In the documentary, the main person being interviewed is someone named Tristan Harris, who used to be a Google ethicist, who is kind of leading us down this journey, warning us about some of the issues that have been arising recently with social media. Overall, I think the movie does a really great job of giving us a top-down view of how some of the issues with social media can affect us on a personal level. The first issue that they talk about is their monetization strategy, how they're able to get us onto the platform, stay on the platform longer, engage with the platform more, and share the content that we find interesting with our friends and other people. One of the first topics that they talk about is the concept known as surveillance capitalism, which is basically how companies like Facebook and Twitter, to a lesser extent, make their money by selling advertisements to different companies. Typically, when we think of using social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, we think of ourselves as the consumer and those platforms as being the product. But what some of the people in the film say is that we are the product and the advertisers are the customer. Throughout their discussion, they talk about kind of three main goals, that being engagement with the platform. That is the amount of time that you're staying on the platform and viewing different content. Second would be growth. That's like sharing with your friends, getting friends onto the platform. Third would be the direct monetization of advertisements, selling advertisements, showing the advertisements to the consumers, being you and I. They talk about how the different algorithms and programs have become so good at getting us to perform on one of these three metrics so well that they're able to really kind of fine-tune and dial up how much they want us to engage with a certain one of those metrics. So for example, they talk about if they wanted to get us to stay on the platform more, what they could do to show us different content to make us kind of click from one article to the next or one post to the next. And if, for example, there's 2 billion users on Facebook, if the algorithms can get us to click one additional time per day, think about how much revenue that would generate. And of course, you and I probably don't click one or two things that we don't want to on a daily basis, probably much more than that. One of the creators has an interesting line that he says that for the first time in technology's history, they're able to put a thought into someone's head that they wouldn't be having otherwise. And their example of this is the notification. So when you get a notification, instantly that comes to the front of your mind, and whatever you're doing before kind of goes to the back of your mind. So the second issue, how is social media impacting our youth? So there's a brief discussion of how social media was never designed with young children or teenagers in mind. Now that we've had social media for several years, we can start to see some of that impact. One of the impacts that startles me as a psychiatrist is the alarming amount of self-harming behaviors that have increased over the past few years. Right now, I'm going to put up a graph to show you how the self-harming behaviors in young females has increased. So you can see that in preteen girls, the amount of self-harming behavior that they would see in a population would actually increase by about threefold, going from about 100 to 300 per 100,000 people. Before social media was out, it was a pretty stable number. Also concerning to me is the number of self-harming presentations in older teenagers, which has also increased substantially. You can see in the graph it almost doubles from 2009 to when the last data point was drawn. And I want to show you another graph showing how the numbers of Facebook users has increased over the years. And you can see around 2008, 2009, there's a pretty significant jump in the amount of users, and that jump has continued to climb, which kind of correlates pretty close to their data. So as a caveat, I would say that this data doesn't necessarily mean that it's just social media's fault for this increase in self-harming behaviors, but it's pretty alarming to say the least. So along with self-harming behaviors, they also note that the amount of suicides has increased, and also the amount of risk aversion has also gone down. Risk aversion we measure in things like when a person gets their license to drive, when they get their first job, when they go on their first date, all of that's being pushed back. The creators talk about the cell phone being sort of a pacifier for any time that a person is feeling bored, uncomfortable, or any emotion that isn't happy or entertained can be resolved by using their phone. The final big point of the film is the question, is social media use dividing us further apart? And does that division cause violence? So in the documentary, they talk about how everyone kind of starts in the same place on social media. Once you start gaining friends, start joining different groups on Facebook, or you start engaging with posts and content, then you start going down a certain pathway. And that pathway is going to be different for every person, of course. So as you start in the middle and engage with content, you start going one way, further, and further, until you're at this very specific point in Facebook, for example, where you're only seeing content that kind of agrees with you, that is aligned with your thoughts and your feelings, your belief system. Sometimes that can be accelerated if you start defriending people or not engaging with content that is outside your beliefs. So this isn't a partisan thing. It can affect anybody. One other startling point that they make is that a untrue fact or untrue article can get shared over on Twitter about 6 times as fast as a true article. So this makes it very difficult for a true content to spread over the internet, as it's got to compete with a lot of misinformation on the internet. The film goes over several examples of violent events, and I'll allow you to make your own decision of whether or not you think that this is true. The film does end on a good point, though, through a message of hope. The creators hope that our fate isn't sealed, that we're not forced to go down these split pathways and go further and further towards our own destruction as a society. They feel that with ethical design in mind, we can start to make changes to some of these platforms in order to prevent us from being too consumed by technology. So if you've seen the movie, I want to know what you thought of it. Do you think that these creators are correct, that we're going down this path of a worse society, a worse life? Or do you think that they've sensationalized things? I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I want to hear from you guys. So now I want to share 5 tips of things that you can do to continue to have good boundaries with social media and technology. My first tip is that before you share anything over the internet, you make sure that it's from a valid and reliable source before sharing it to other people. My second piece of advice is make sure that you turn off notifications for any program that you don't necessarily need. So for me, for example, I turned off Twitter notifications, so I'm not getting kind of constantly reminded to look at my phone when I'm doing other things. My third piece of advice, notice that in the movie, the tech creators are very nervous about allowing their children to have screen time and to engage too early with social media. So for those of you that are parents out there, make sure that when you do allow your child to use social media and screen time, that you do so mindfully and have a good plan around that. If you'd like more information about that, I can make more videos about that in the future. Number 4, make sure that you keep the devices outside of your bedroom at nighttime. This is advice that could help both children and adults. And number 5, make sure that you designate some device-free time, whether you're a single person living by yourself or you're in a family situation where you want to spend more quality time with your family members. For example, keeping the devices away from the dinner table will allow you to have more fulfilling conversations. Hopefully you thought those tips were helpful. If you have any other tips of how to have a good relationship with social media in your phone, please leave them down in the comments. I'd appreciate it. Thank you for watching the video. If this is your first time here, make sure that you subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you can see more videos like this in the future. Anyway, I'm Dr. Mike. Make sure that you spend some time away from your devices and with your families. I'll see you next time.